Hello, everyone. My name is Siobhan Barker. We are going to start on time, but it will be an open door room. As we know, people arrive at different times for different reasons. I know that some folks have also been turned away for rooms being smaller than what the crowd needed. I think, well, we have lots of room right now, but if it comes to that, I am going to push for an affinity entrance policy that no BIPOC person is turned away. So it could get squishy, just giving you a heads up. And in addition to that, just in terms of access measures, feel free to stand if that's what you need. These chairs are kind of squished together, so they're not great for all body types. If you need to sit up against the wall, go for it. My other hat is disability justice, so just want to bring a level of comfort into the room that also works for me. This is how my voice sounds. I'm not ill. I do have asthma, so I may need my inhaler and may be coughing, but again, just disability. So we are joined here today by Jean-Marie Guerrier of Black History Ottawa. As I've mentioned, I'm Siobhan Barker from Hogan's Alley Society in Vancouver, British Columbia. And I also have with me my colleague, Jamira Lovemore, also from Hogan's Alley Society. I'm pleased to have made many acquaintances over our days together, some of whom we've spent time together at the Land Summit just recently, or at last year's CAEH. So we recognize and acknowledge that Hogan's Alley Society is comprised of immigrants, some recent, some generations ago. We recognize that we benefit from the ongoing colonization of the land, and thus that this acknowledgement is a process that requires more than a singular statement. We are constantly seeking out means to research and to educate ourselves as to how best to honor the Indigenous communities and culture who continue to shape this land. We are grateful to be living and working in solidarity on, and sorry, this is Vancouver specific, on the unceded and occupied ancestral territories of the Katsi, Kwantlen, Kikwit-Lem, Muskie, Kekwat, Stolo, Tawasan, Tsleil-Waututh, Semiahmoo, Squamish, Sumas, Musqueam nations of the Lower Mainland. Now, in the century-old and ongoing ceremonial African ancestral tradition of thankful libations as a life-giving and life-affirming community practice for supporting the well-being of Black communities, well, libations can be wet, giving life to nourish and sustain, or dry libations, offering our words and our thoughts. This African ancestral acknowledgement offers a point of reflection on the past, provides context for the present challenges faced by the Black community, and supports a desire for a hopeful future. The aim, spirit, and intention is solemn recognition and reflection. It is an expression of gratitude and a request for the guidance and wisdom that has helped people of African descent survive and thrive through the ages. Ashe, 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 and so it is. So I will pass the mic along and present Jean-Marie to speak with us here today.
Okay.
Oh, pardon.
Perfect. Okay. All right. Well, thank you and welcome everybody. And I'd like to add the Anishinaabe people as well as part of the land acknowledgement for the Ottawa region. So today I'm going to provide a brief overview of the history of the migrations of Black people in the Ottawa region, as well as provide an example of a history of displacement right here in the city. Ottawa right now is the third largest community after Toronto and Montreal, and it actually did not start that way. Ottawa didn't always have a very big Black presence in the beginning, and now to see that it's the third largest city, we'll go through those migration waves to show you how that happened. And let me say as well that our organization, Black History Ottawa, so we've been here in Ottawa since 1986. Our mandate is mainly history, talking about the history, contributions of Black Canadians in Canada, but more specifically in Ottawa. But we also partner with some organizations on different initiatives to improve the well-being of the Black community here in Ottawa. So if we are looking at early settlement, for the Ottawa region. In the 1800s, we didn't have many Black people here. In fact, the four that you see here are the only four that we've been able to document from the 1800s. And then there were very few following that in the early 20th century because of the history of immigration policies that restricted Black immigration, where they actually stated that they didn't believe that Black people were suited for this climate, so they didn't welcome them. In the 1930s, there were a group of West Indian patriots that came to Canada, and there was about 300 of them, and some of them landed here in Ottawa. So there was one of the ones that came here, actually, his name is Herbert Brown. And Herbert Brown is considered like a capital builder here because he had established a business that still exists here that was started in 1955. So I'll talk a bit more about him later. So after we had the immigration policies, we had some changes in the immigration policies, and that happened with a group of people actually that came to Ottawa that was led by Donald Moore, and they advocated for changes in the immigration reforms. And at that same time, we also had different programs that were started. So we had the West Indian domestic schemes, and with that, there were many women that came here that settled. And when they came here, that's where, again, we could go back to Herbert Brown, because his house and his business kind of served as a settlement agency, if you want, or community center. That's where a lot of them came to get advice and to get assistance. Herb Brown actually would serve as father for some of the ladies when they get married, because a lot of them didn't have their father here. So in the 50s and early in the 60s, we also had some professionals, students that came to Ottawa. And by that time, until then, there was just about a few hundred people in Ottawa. So 50s going into the 60s, we're now looking at about 2,000 people in Ottawa. And then there were also some diplomats from newly formed independent Caribbean nations that came also to settle here. And then in the 70s, we also had some African countries that started opening diplomatic missions here in Ottawa. And there were also some skilled laborers that started coming in the 70s. With the 80s, we saw more immigration from the African community, as there were some civil wars, famine, unrest, even in countries like in Haiti. So in the 80s, now we're looking at around just under 10,000 people that were in Ottawa. As well, in the 90s, there was a lot more people that started coming to Ottawa, and that's when we start seeing a bit more areas where you see more Black people. Up until then, Black people just would live wherever they could afford it, wherever they didn't face discrimination in terms of housing. So there was no real set communities. But in the 80s and 90s, this is when we start seeing more communities being settled in Ottawa. So here is just showing a map of the neighborhood inequity. And so in those maps, that's where we actually see a lot of those new immigrants come, because that's where you have social housing, that's where they could afford rent. And so a lot of the new immigrants, that's where you would find that are established. And those communities were mainly in the south of Ottawa, and then with some of the French community, you would have people coming in the Vanier area, which was more Francophone. So this slide shows you that, again, in those communities, 17.8% of the population, of the rich-like population, lived in core housing, and they lived in more higher buildings that were 5 stories or higher. So one of the stories I'm showing you here 5 areas where there were some Black displacements in Canada. We've got Hogan's Alley in Vancouver, Africville, and Halifax, and I think some of you are from there or heard about it later today. There's Little Burgundy in Montreal, Amber Valley in Alberta, and here, one that's probably not known about as much is the Heron Gate community. So in the Heron Gate community, what we have in the mid-90s, when we had a lot of the immigrants coming, that's where a lot of them would settle. So that area was probably about 70% racialized people that lived in that area. And it's close to another neighborhood that's Alta Vista, which is a high-end area. And so the builder decided that they wanted to build more high-end housing that reflects a little bit more like what Alta Vista is like. And so they started a process where they displaced the people in that area. In total, there was about 3,000 people that were displaced, and they did that in 2 phases. So the first phase was in 2016, and then in 2018 is when they completed this displacement. The company is called Timbercreek Asset Management, and it said that one of the major reasons that they wanted to get rid of the housing and build new housing is because the units, they thought they were beyond fixing, so they couldn't fix them. So they tore them down and built higher housing where people that were living there before couldn't afford the rent. So this highlights a little bit of what happens a lot in the communities, where when there's an area that at some point didn't have maybe value, but then later on they recognize that because of where it is, it has more value, so they come and they use any excuse that they want to displace the community that was there. And this is what happened here in Ottawa. Even when we were preparing this, we were talking about, has there been stories of displacement? And I lived here in Ottawa for a while. I even forgot that story because it happened, but it didn't make too much news. And it is something that, like I said, it's happened in 2016. Yeah, so what I wanted to provide you today is just a brief overview of, because you're here in Ottawa, what the Ottawa community is like. We are a growing community. And we are also making sure with strong advocacy that this type of story that happened in Haringey doesn't happen again, because there are other areas in the city where there's a strong concentration of immigrants, and some of those are close to the river. So that's something definitely we've got to watch to make sure that they don't use excuse again to displace those people. And every time they get displaced, we know what happens. It's hard to find rent, and then those people, some of them might become homeless. So this is what I had to present for you today, and I'll turn it back to Siobhan, who will talk to you more about the Hogan Tally.
Can I get this mic live? Thank you. So just, I know normally we wait till the very end to do questions, especially when we do them in segments, but I know that that is a struggle for folks with neurodiverse needs, and so we're going to mix it up a little bit. I'm more than capable of wrangling a room, so we will do a brief question and answer period for Jean-Marie, and then we will continue on with the second portion of the presentation. So there is Slido for doing questions. The number for Slido is...
I wasn't familiar with Slido. Do you guys know what Slido is?
Okay, so I can give you a bit of an overview. So Slido.com is a website you can use. You just go to Slido.com, enter this number, and you can also add your question in there. So there's, pardon? SLIDO. SLIDO, Slido.com. It's this number, which is 269-8123. So that's 269-8123. So you can add your question into there. You can also log in and upvote questions as well. So if we are running short on time at the end, we can see which questions are the most popular. I find it really helpful for myself as somebody with neurodiversity. I want to just pop up the question and then I forget it. So having this helps me to have it written down. So that's an option for folks. We can also just take traditional style questions, but this is available as well.
Since I am presenter and moderator, I would invite you to come forward and use the mic if you are able to come forward. Otherwise, we will repeat your question into the room so that it's available for everyone to be able to hear it. So again, these are questions for Jean-Marie of Black History Ottawa.
Like we saw, like the one that happened in 2016 with her, someone was still in body. Like, what are we doing as a community going forward that cases like this happen, that they're, I don't know how to say, but they are communicated and something is kind of so a little like for the community.
Okay, I will try to repeat. What are we doing about it with cases like Haringey to be having the information communicated, and what are we doing about it moving forward?
At the time for the Haringey, there was some community meetings as well with local residents, and there were also a group that was formed, the Haringey Tenant Coalition, but it didn't get much coverage. So going forward, anything like that would happen, we'd have to make sure that everybody from the Black community in Ottawa gets together to make sure that this is heard, that we contact news, that we report it, and that we make even network with other groups that have experienced something like that, because it happened, and as it was explained, it was explained as it was a good for the community, because those units were not good, they were beyond repair, right? So now that we're more aware of this and knowing where some of the other pockets are where there's a lot of racialized people, right? We would have to listen more to what they're trying to say, right? not buy the beautiful words that are, oh, we're going to revamp it. Well, what does that mean for the people that live here, right? What's going to happen with them? And make sure we have answer to those before they go ahead with that. But the other thing is we see sometimes those builders, they work with city councilors or other officials, right? So before you even hear about it, that project is already a few steps ahead. So we've got to keep our ear to the ground.
Thank you.
So we do have a couple questions from Slido.
You all are very, very fast.
So I will start with this one that speaks specifically to Haringey. What are the communities or neighborhoods in Ottawa that are at risk of repeating what has happened in Haringey?
Oh, that's something that our organization as Blackish Ottawa, we're not involved in as much, but that is like, to also tie to your question, that's something that we need to identify, be ahead of it to make sure that that doesn't happen. I did mention, for example, this community in the West End, Ritchie, not too far from Haringey, there's another area, Hetherington. So we do know where some of those are. So we just got to make sure that we, the groups that work in that sphere, that they're aware of whatever new development is coming along and what it means. Yeah.
One thing I would also flag in terms of communities in Ottawa specifically, I'm going to just bring Bell North and Bell South, those two particular areas. We're talking about just west of Bronson. There was some redevelopment in that area about 10 years ago. I'm not sure how that's changed in terms of some folks. That's where I grew up, and I know myself and other Black families are no longer there. So just if we're talking about neighborhoods to flag in Ottawa, those are two to also bring into the conversation. There's a couple more questions that I'll bring into this particular space. Was there any financial compensation to the displaced occupants of the Haringey or supports with rehousing?
Unfortunately, I was not able to find that information. And again, like I said, it was not very well publicized what happened. So in researching this, I've become more interested in that. So I will look up that information because I wasn't able to find anything regarding financial compensation.
Okay, one more specific to, let me know when we're at time and all, because I've got quite a few here.
Oh, I forgot to start counting, yes. Go for it.
Okay, so another one is, what is the rate of homelessness in Ottawa of the Black community?
Oh, good question. I do have that somewhere here, sorry.
I feel like I saw some statistics on Marie-Cécile's presentation today. Was there not? Was Vancouver?
Was Vancouver.
Oh, okay.
No, I did have that, but I don't have, I didn't bring it with me.
Well, the great thing with Slido is we can loop back around
Yeah,
and,
okay.
and send out responses. So it's
15?
it's always an overrepresentation. We can always count on that, right? Vancouver, it's 1% of the population, 9% of homeless stats, right? Whatever the low number is, we go high.
Another, sorry?
No, go ahead.
Another question I have here, what connections does your organization have with other Black historical societies in Ontario?
Well, we've worked with the OBHS, the Ontario Black Historical Society, around Black History Month events, but it's not something that's done on a regular basis. If there's a special project, that would happen. For example, when we recently launched a bus tour, so it's called Black History in Ottawa Streets, and for certain information, we would reach out to some members of some of those organizations just to verify the information. As we were collecting the info, we needed to vet a lot of that. But we tend to each work on our own corner, so there is a little bit of collaboration at times, but usually everybody is very busy doing their own thing, as working together means more resources, and a lot of those organizations are volunteer-run and don't have the resources to take on too much in terms of partnership.
I'm going to just, I guess I'll do two more questions for specific to Black History Ottawa, and then there's other questions here that are actually quite good to expand for everybody, so I'll bring those out afterwards. But one more for right now. Would it make sense to bring the Heron Gate community to media now, even after the fact, to bring the issue to mind of the community at large for future prevention, pardon me?
I believe so. If we're gonna identify areas and find out areas that are at risk, it would be good to understand exactly what happened. And as I said, there was a Heron Gate tenant community that was formed. So if we could connect with some of those people, and they would provide more information and probably tell us what to look for in the future for other communities that are at risk.
Thank you, Jean-Marie. I had a question.
Yeah.
Just to bring this information into the room. So some folks may be familiar already. Does anyone recall the sort of project that went across the country, Connecting the Dots? Mm-hmm. Yes? A few folks nodding, right? So this is something that is linked to Black History Ottawa, and perhaps you could give some context to that and maybe name what that project was about in terms of both information gathering and where it maybe sits now.
Yeah, the project was, when it started, it was because people, as somebody asked before, if we work with other historical societies, it was to find out a little bit of what's happening in different communities, instead of duplicating everybody working at their own corner, learn how people have been doing certain things, so we can just replicate it and not have to start from ground zero. And then on the website, we would also, when we go to the different cities, so we went to cities from Vancouver to Halifax, and in each of the cities met with organizations in those cities to find out what they're doing and highlight the programs that they're running in the city. So it was a great way for people to find out what's happening across the country, and if there's something that you wanted to do as well, you'd be able to connect with other people and find out, hey, how can I do this? So the goal of this was really to make it easier for people to run different programs, projects, and find resources that can help them. The program ran for 2 years. It was a funded program, and unfortunately, after that, we didn't get funding to continue it. But the website is still up, and a lot of that information is still available on the website.
So thank you so much. So just to add a little bit, so this was a project, right, that went across the country seeking out Black communities to hear about these particular areas of focus. They spoke to questions on education, arts and culture, media and journalism, employment equity, health, justice, economic prosperity, and civic engagement. So I myself participated in 2 of them. And I know they were also in my hometown of Windsor. So it truly across the country, gathering communities into focus groups to be able to share specifically on those areas of focus, and gathering really a Canada-wide collation of information from Black communities across the country. Jean-Marie's downplaying it. This was significant. This was a very big deal, largely in part because the decade of African descent, which has been extended, but to gather that information, to be able to say, as we've spoke to in so many different ways, the importance of statistics, the importance of generating data in order to have decision-making, and have a premise for saying, look at this body of information, look at these voices, and what these voices are saying and asking and contributing. You meant to say that, yes?
Yes.
That's what I felt inside. Yes. All right. So we're going to move along. Angela has, yes, sir.
I wanted to know the history of this Heron Gate. Do you have a general history of the Heron Gate, and as to why it was displaced? Like Abbottville, we got a general history as to what happened. We may not know all the details, but is there some reason that was given by the municipality or the county or whatever as to what happened to Heron Gate and why it was displaced?
So with Heron Gate, it wasn't the city or the province. It was a private builder, right, that initiated that. So they just wanted to put higher-end apartments. It's not like so it's different than Africville and some of those other communities in the sense that it was the private builder that wanted to just get rid of those houses and put higher-end units.
So was it their land or the people in the Heron Gate? Was it the Heron Gate land or the private builders?
It was the private builders, because these were people that came, immigrated to Canada in the 80s, 90s, early 2000s. That's where they settled, because that's where there was a lot of social housing. It's not, it wasn't their land.
Thank you, Jean-Marie. And I'll just remind you with Slido, you can continue to put forth questions that maybe are more specific to Jean-Marie, and we'll revisit them later in the presentation. I just wanted to invite Angela to circulate. There's a bit of information about Hogan's Alley Society, so we'll pass those along. And I guess we'll switch over.
And you'll do the text?
Oui.
Okay.
Merci, Jean-Marie.
While Siobhan is setting up for our Hogan's Alley specific presentation, I want to give a shout out to one of the questions on here about, have you ever researched settlement on Salt Spring Island in BC? You're ahead of the curve. We're going to get to that. So just a little teaser.
So I will actually invite my colleague Jamira up to start us off. Oh, maybe I should say a tiny bit more. So there was a slide that said my official title with Hogan's Alley, which is Director of Community Care. I like to say I was with Hogan's Alley before it was a society, back when it was still community consultations that brought us into being formed. This department was one that I conceptualized and created in order to address connecting with the community in meaningful ways on subjects of culture, of housing, of land stewardship. Jamira also predates the forming of employees at Hogan's Alley, and so works with me in the community care department. And so I'm very pleased to have Jamira here with me as the conference reached out. Last year, I did a tour of Africville, which was wonderful, which highlighted some of the parallels in terms of displacement and the economic disparity that comes through that displacement. They asked to organize something for this year. I was worried that we were the only Black content, but then discovered that that it was not the case. So I was very, very pleased. And so Jamira will bring us into this next piece of our sharing. I know.
Okay, thank you, Siobhan, for the introduction. So a little bit about Hogan's Alley. This was the unofficial name for the nucleus of Vancouver's concentrated Black community in the early 1900s. Working as a sleeping car porter was actually considered a pretty good job, and it was one of the few jobs that was available to Black folks. But policies of segregation, policies that kept Black folks out of a litany of neighborhoods in Vancouver meant that folks concentrated close to the railroad. And so Hogan's Alley is actually quite close to Vancouver's version of Union Station, which is Pacific Central, yes. I don't know if you had done it beforehand. Was it up there now?
Yeah.
Okay, so this kind of speaks more to that. So we have Black immigrants coming in from California, settling into Vancouver in the early 1900s. And that area, it was called Strathcona. Strathcona is a multi-ethnic community, but this was where the concentration of Black folks was. Going back to the previous slide, we can see here, this is a common, or not common, this is the alleyway that is Park Lane now. So this is one of the remnants that still exists. If you look at the map on the left, your right-hand side, the yellow area is Vi's Chicken and Steakhouse and Nora Hendrix's home. If you know Jimi Hendrix, you might know of his grandparents. They were vaudeville actors that came to Vancouver and settled in that area. The purple area is the Fountain Chapel Church. This was where Black folks congregated on Sundays. And then, of course, we lived in the area in the middle in the green. So this is the historic area of Hogan's Alley. It's about a 10-block area. And the concentration of it was Park Lane and Union.
So at this point, we wanted to share a little bit from one of the very, very secret, apparently, so secret that you might not be able to search and find these links. So do snap a picture.
That is not a joke. These are both unlisted YouTube videos. They were done by TELUS Storyhive about, I want to say 5 or 6 years ago. So there's two particular histories. One of them is called Secret Vancouver, and that one speaks specifically about Hogan's Alley. And the other one is Secret Victoria, which speaks more broadly around early Black migrations and settlement in British Columbia. And so the one question about Salt Spring Island, that video actually directly speaks to that. Spoiler alert, Black folks were the first settlers of Salt Spring Island.
Oopsies. So now, just need to open the video.
First incident took place at the Victoria Theatre. Nathan Pointer had been Mifflin Gibbs's first partner in San Francisco. Nathan and his wife Sarah were among the first Blacks to arrive in Victoria, and he prospered.
When I was going to school, you know, you learned about the British and you learned about all sorts of different people, but there's really nothing about my own people. This story about the Black pioneers of British Columbia, it's a big story of a small group of people and the fortitude to go forward to embrace a new life. It's a fascinating story, really. It's a hidden story.
This is the grave of a sea captain, Jeremiah Nagel, who was responsible for bringing a large number of the first blacks here from California.
700 black people in a year and a half. We needed the population, otherwise the United States would have taken us.
This is a story about people who should not have succeeded as well as they did in a place as unlikely as Victoria, British Columbia. Canada was settled by a corporate structure, the Hudson's Bay Company. And so while the Americans had frontiersmen and cowboys and, individual settler families, the Hudson's Bay Company had clerks from the Hebrides.
So in 1849, Great Britain declares this island, Vancouver Island, a colony, even though there's probably only 40 or 50 non-Indigenous people here and something like 25,000 Indigenous inhabitants on the island. So those few people suddenly became a colony.
So this was a very small outpost here at that time. Was it a bit chaotic? Well, it was in its infancy, for sure, but certainly there were rules and regulations.
Victoria was just, it was mud in the streets and, a town just, beginning to sprout its wings.
It had only a nominal military protection, one or two Royal Navy vessels, but they knew they were in a pretty weak position, all told.
There was a definite threat that the Americans would expand north. They've already annexed Texas, they provoked a war with Mexico and seized essentially California and New Mexico, Arizona.
And there was a lot of talk about manifest destiny and how the whole North America was going to be the United States. Sir James Douglas, who was the chief factor of the Hudson's Bay Company in the West, could see that he was in a vulnerable position. You had the Russians to the north of him, the Americans to the south, and he didn't have much to back up British claims to this territory.
And with the gold rush, it really brought it all to a head. James Douglas said the gold rush would be complete trouble for them, trouble without end.
California had its own gold discovery in 1849, and that was the big one that brought hundreds of thousands of migrants, totally overwhelming the indigenous population there, the Spanish population there. But that gold rush starts to peter out, and James Douglas could see Americans poised in San Francisco looking for another opportunity, another strike to head towards. Meantime, First Nations have been trading gold. Gold was of no value to the First Nations. They did not collect it, they did not value it until they noticed that the Europeans were paying a lot of money for these shiny pebbles. And so they started to trade with the Hudson's Bay Company. James Douglas, who was in charge of the Hudson's Bay Company here, he tried to keep that news quiet.
But you can't keep gold discoveries quiet. You get the first reports of Fraser River gold and Thompson River gold discoveries occurring in the few newspapers there are. They get repeated in Oregon press, and those get reprinted in California press.
So he knew he was going to suddenly find himself with an avalanche of Americans on his hands, and just a few hundred clerks defend British interests.
He actually asked the British government to send out a military force to keep all foreign miners out. That is refused.
Prospectors could easily have simply declared the Republic of Fraser River, whatever. And they were all well armed, very well armed.
There was every possibility that British Columbia could have been run over and become an American state. And so if you could find settlers, you needed settlers. You needed people growing food. You needed people paying tax. You needed to create a revenue in order to build the roads.
He needed at least a civilian population that was not American. And he knew one population that had just been decreed by the Supreme Court to be non-American, and and those were free blacks born in the USA.
Black population in the United States in the 1850s was a mixture of a large number of plantation slaves who were owned by white plantation owners, and free blacks who had, often they'd purchased their own freedom by working and saving money. So technically free, but really without the rights of citizens.
I mean, they were free people, but what did that entail? Not much. They were not able to actually purchase land in the States. They could rent it, they could work on somebody else's land, but it wasn't theirs.
They couldn't vote, they couldn't testify against a white man in court, they couldn't serve on juries. They were essentially unpersons.
And then a couple of really significant court cases happened in the United States in the 1850s, especially a decision called the Dred Scott decision. Dred Scott was a slave who essentially been promised his freedom, and the courts ruled that his slave owner could take him back at any time.
The Dred Scott decision had said that even a freeborn black person in the USA could never become a citizen. And this essentially consigned hundreds of thousands of people to this perpetual limbo.
California in the 1850s was a so-called free state, that there was no institutionalized slavery in California.
It was very much a white man's state. There were a lot of pro-slavery people living in it. And the black people said, what can we do about this?
A lot of these people that had fled to California, they spent their whole life running from the man, running from persecution, running from racism, running from racist laws.
They were hungry for a new opportunity and were casting around, looking north and south into Mexico, north into British Columbia. I think even some folks considered, South America as a way of escaping this prejudice.
They had to find a peace of mind. They had to find a land where they could live in peace without being persecuted because of the color of their skin. Douglas here, he had heard about their dilemma that they were in San Francisco, because of the Dred Scott decision. And he had empathy because of his background. A lot of people don't realize Douglas was biracial himself.
James Douglas had been born in what was then British Guyana. His father was Scottish, and his mother was what they called Creole, which meant that she was presumably part black and part white.
He was the right man at the right time to mold the province of British Columbia.
Especially as a mixed-raced gentleman, it just made perfect sense to send an invitation down south of the border to San Francisco to say, hey, why don't you come up here? Check us out.
Come to British Columbia and settle as British citizens where they would have the right to vote and own property.
Which was just a dramatic contrast to what the Americans now offered them.
What they did was they sent a group of about 5 people up ahead of time to see if this was a legitimate reason or a legitimate letter.
They met Douglas, they looked around, they saw a lot of job opportunities. One man wrote back saying, this is a God-sent land for the colored man. So very rapidly after that news got back, something like 600 black people, men, women, children, arrived in Victoria Harbor and became new settlers.
To me, one of the great ironies and sad ironies of this migration was that they booked passage on the Commodore, and I think after they booked passage, the word got out that there's gold in British Columbia, so some 300 other passengers booked on the Commodore, and these were Americans, the same Americans they were fleeing, basically, the same racism and prejudice they were fleeing, hopped on the boat with them and came with them to British Columbia. So
I'm going to stop that there. This is just a bit of British Columbian history, speaking specifically around early black settlement. This came to Victoria and then subsequently later Vancouver, Hogan's Alley, as I mentioned before. Oops, excuse me. Let's switch over.
Yep. All right. Oh, that was a good run. That was a good run. Okay, I'll take it. Okay. So this, oops, oh dear, the time of displacement that contributed to, whoops, what's going on with the slide? No? Right. So there were various factors that contributed, that continue to contribute to the housing imbalance that we have today. And some of that is captured in the historical pieces of how and why the invitation into Canada that was not part of the transatlantic slave trade. And of course, the hope that there would not be the discriminatory practices and segregation that were going to follow into Canada. But of course, we know that that was not the case, right? This was not and is not a country devoid of the elements that continue to impact economically the Black community and continue to dissuade from the ability to foster generational wealth. If you're not allowed to own property, if you're not considered a person and you're not allowed to own property, or you're not allowed to rent, or you're not allowed to take certain jobs, there's not going to be the opportunity to be able to change one's circumstance in relation to housing and land ownership or home ownership. And so, of course, the restrictive land covenants that some Jean-Marie spoke of, some we've heard other speakers reference as well, meaning that it was literally against the law to either rent or allow purchase of various racialized communities, Blacks, Indigenous, of course, Asian communities, quite specifically in particular areas of our, well, not our, because Jamiro's in Ontario, but in the Vancouver region. And these policies, of course, like with Africville, like with Hogan's Alley, like with other communities that have been mentioned that are known to you and less known, it was very much an intentionality to put forward the language that then termed these areas blights, and that they were such a problem that people would rally at the notion of these solutions being offered. The displacement didn't matter, right? Because if this place is so rampant with crime and drugs and disease and all manner of things, right? It's like, oh, what is going to be offered as a solution? And then the solution becomes the urban renewal that leads to the displacement. I mean, to this day, public service, the buses, right? No buses, no water to Africville, to various, areas. Upper Hammonds folks were talking as well about, yes? Fire hydrants not coming and working, right? If you continue to not have the infrastructure to allow an area to be, come, say it louder. I'm like, yes, to thrive, exactly. This is the kind of space where you call out things, people. Just call them out. Yes. Because I know there's so much expertise in the room, and there's just these few microphones, so I can't invite you all up here. Just call it out. All right. So I'll bring Jamira back over with me. So Hogan's Alley specifically addresses the Black and African diaspora of the lower mainland. So that's a population of about 2.6 million that covers that expanse, of which we are 2% of that 2.6 million. People continually say, oh, there's no Black people here. No, we need to stop that, right? It might not be in a concentration and visible, in your particular classroom or in your particular workplace, but we do not need to engage in invisibilizing ourselves.
To that point, I'd like to say, when we're speaking about folks experiencing houselessness, we're speaking about the different ways that that can show up for people. How often do we show up in these censuses? You need to have an address to be on the census. The Vancouver Homelessness Count, which I've done twice now. We do our best to canvass folks, but sometimes people are invisibly homeless. They might be on a couch. If they're in the shelter that night, they'll be counted in that shelter. If they're not in the shelter that night, they hopefully will be counted on the street, but we're never quite certain. So using this data is important, and we need it for getting grants, getting all these things forward for our own particular projects, but it is not the be-all, end-all. Having lived experience means that we know where we are. We know what's going on for our community, and it's important that we advocate from that standpoint as well as the data.
Continue.
Okay. Okay.
That one has a microphone. See how easy that was.
So we're going to move into some of the specific work that we do within Hogan's Alley Society. We have a couple different support programs that we run within community care. Shout out to Siobhan for creating these programs, because the board and Hogan's Alley Working Group was very much specifically focused on Black restorative justice around land. So when I speak about the T-shaped intersection that is Hogan's Alley, they built a viaduct on there. They put a highway over our community. They put a highway over our homes. They put a highway over, or piece of highway over our gravesite. They put that right on top of us. And so Hogan's Alley's working group, pre us coming in, was focused around restorative justice for that space. When the city of Vancouver said the viaducts are going to come down, we said, hi, what about some Black restorative justice? But within that, there's only so much work that folks can do individually as a working group. We stepped in to create community care, to focus on supports for the community of people that exists right now, that is living at multiple intersections, that does not have active support in community. So we're going to talk a little bit about our housing. Oh, I thought we were on a whole different slide.
Nope.
Pardon me. We're going to talk a little bit about our housing support program. So this specific program supports Metro Vancouver Black folks through intervention and advocacy. So this could mean interrupting somebody before they become houseless. This could mean, I think it's the residential tenancy, I'm trying to think of what it is in Ontario, but residential tenancy board is what we interact with in BC through the Residential Tenancy Act. And so often folks, and it's been stated in other presentations as well, are not aware of their rights as tenants, and landlords use this to their advantage. The Residential Tenancy Board is an impartial group that kind of mediates this. Pardon me. And so we support tenants with their rights with respect to the Residential Tenancy Act, and just make sure that they are aware of how they have recourse within that.
I'll give you an example of a family, sorry, two big people sharing a microphone, yes, of a family that we engaged with in terms of advocacy. It was a family of 5, a single mother and 4 children. The landlord had divided up the utilities in relation to the number of people. The landlord lived upstairs with 1 person, and the single mother lived downstairs with 4 children. In fact, when she moved in, she had 3 children and then was pregnant, and the 4th child came along. So her share of utilities was 5 portions, and their share was 2. So the infant had an equal share with the, yes, because they are mad with power with their tiny technology. An equal share, yes, with the adults upstairs. I mean, this, we went to the Residential Tenancy Act. We advocated, and they lost because it was something that had been put forward to this person at a time where the alternative was to be unhoused. And they signed and they accepted it when there were fewer children, but there was no recourse. Thousands of dollars was awarded to the landlord, who additionally did other quite fraudulent things. Just because we have the policy, if we are engaged in the same kind of racist interpretation, we will continue to have deeply disenfranchised individuals who have no alternative to being unhoused than accepting despicable conditions. Do not get me started talking about Rat Boy, who said, "It's okay, Siobhan. I'm used to it. They don't come near my head at night."
I wish that was the only rodent story, but it's not. And this is the reality for a lot of people. They'll accept subpar tenancy experiences because the alternative is a shelter, or maybe not even that, just being unhoused. So a lot of our work is around advocating. It's around documenting these things, making sure tenants are aware of what is in place that they can use to their advantage, and what landlords' responsibilities are as well.
So what are we doing? What are we doing as a community to try and move the needle, to shift things? Well, we do have funding now, so that's great. We are not volunteering, which is what we literally did for years, which I'm glad we're not anymore. But I certainly understand that route because it was years. So we are able to do programs to try and meet people where they're at. But we are literally it. We are the two staff for those, what was it, 2.6 million, the 2%? Yeah, this is it, right? So it seems like not enough might be the idea, right? We are moving towards the land trust model, which has been spoken about so eloquently earlier on. Did you want to
add to the land trust?
Yeah, you can. Go ahead.
So this is going back to what I said about the Hogan's Alley Working Group and that demand to the City of Vancouver for restorative justice. The City of Vancouver waffled on that response for quite some time, in particular to how the viaducts were going to come down, who was going to pay for the viaducts to come down, and the plans that they may have had for the Northeast False Creek plan, which is the general area around where the viaducts exist now. In 2020, a group of people held the viaducts for about 2 days in protest of the city having waffling on the signing of an MOU. So the viaducts are the plan essentially in Vancouver was to create a large highway system that goes along, which is called, I guess, number one, that then links to the viaducts. And there's like a large overpass / mini highway system that then brings you into downtown. So as opposed to driving through the streets of through Main and then Hastings to get to downtown, the viaducts take you straight up so you can kind of go. For a lot of folks who are, say, navigating from the suburbs to the downtown core to work, that takes you straight through. And so they erased the Black community to put these viaducts in. The actual, in the Secret Vancouver video, if you watch it, you'll see the larger history there, but the plan was to actually create a much larger highway system. And because of what was happening in the Black community, folks actually started to rise up. There was a large protest movement in the 70s when they started to see the destruction of Hogan's Alley, and they were able to stop the continual creation of these, the larger highway system. So what is remaining is the viaducts.
It's a very, very modest stretch of road. And it does not serve the purpose that it was originally intended for at all. But the displacement nonetheless took place. And that legacy is still with us today. What happens to break it down, a community gets displaced, they have no ability to repurchase, re-rent, turns into the unseen homelessness that we spoke of, and existing wherever you can. But the businesses aren't there. The churches aren't there. There's nowhere to come together to build community again. If everyone is so spread out, right, we start to say things like, we're not here. So these pieces are important markers in history as to why we are here dealing with this in this way. But there are many pieces inside of the work that we do that don't address some of the particulars to the newcomer, the immigrant experience, in terms of access to support, in terms of viability of consideration of housing. These are independent market-based housing. The building that we operate, one is a harm reduction building, one is sort of student-specific with single occupancy rooms. So when we're working with the housing program, it's looking to place people into independent living situations with landlords. But if you're asking a newcomer for a number of years of tenancy, if you're asking for a credit report, if you're asking for these markers that automatically discriminate against them, well, isn't that a convenient way to be a racist? So, moving towards solutions.
I just want to connect the work of the Hogan's Alley Working Group to this particular community land trust idea. So this is what the Memorandum of Understanding was fought for, that we could have a Black cultural space. The community land trust is land that is to be leased to Hogan's Alley Society for the Black community. Mm-hmm. So it cannot be, again, expropriated or taken away. Again, this is Black land to be held in trust in the Black community, for us to build purpose-built spaces, for us to have a Black community center, for us to have housing for folks of different family sizes. The Hogan's Alley Community Land Trust is a keystone
and businesses,
yes, a keystone product that involves the work of people that I just really want to name, like Stephanie Allen, like Dr. June Francis, like Amina Yassin, people that have been working on this for quite a lot of time, and also sit on the shoulders of the Hogan's Alley Working Group that's been in operation since, 2003, 2008 with Wade Compton. So there are layers to this work, right? And our capacity is not always at 100%. It does really rely on us being able to build upon each other's labor. Continuing forward.
So we're also quite fortunate to have Marie-Cécile here, who in our next slide we reference the Housing Solutions Lab. And this was, well, as you can read, the goals of identifying systemic and structural interpersonal barriers of the Black community in Vancouver. I almost feel like you should just come up here and tell us about it. Come here. I was not being subtle. That was me. Yes, come. No, I actually say what I mean. It's wild that way.
Oh, wow, okay. Let me try to remember that project. Okay. Hi. So I was part of the project along with other folks, and I looked at the qualitative part of the research, which was to really understand what the experiences of Black Vancouverites were when it comes to accessing and maintaining housing. So what we found was, of course, systemic racism was very prevalent, but it was at different levels, right? It was accessing housing, maintaining housing. But another result that we actually found was also the racism that Black workers experienced in the housing sector. And that was something that was really prevalent, was when in these organizations, Black workers were being discriminated against. And they were also noticing that workers that weren't racialized were also discriminating against Black individuals that were unhoused and not letting them access the services and programs that were available. So that was another barrier for Black individuals trying to access housing. So that's not being put on the spot. I'm trying to remember all the stuff that came out of that. But what we found, what we found was systemic anti-Black racism was a huge barrier to Black individuals maintaining and accessing housing.
Thank you. And the report is available, that is being referenced, so you can always go and gather some more information. I'm struggling with this microphone, but I'll keep trying to manage. So as we kind of come to the end of our time together, because there is really truly so much expertise in the room, I wanted to make sure that there was enough time that if you want to stand and say a little bit about the work that you're doing within the Black community, or you have questions at this point, you can use the Slido, you can raise a hand, or there is an open invitation to briefly say a little bit about your own work within the Black community. What does Siobhan mean when they say briefly? I mean, like, you know, a minute, perhaps two. All right. So now is your time. Thank you. Not going to go outside? We'll just show it. Oh. Oh. Yeah.
I know there's no moderator in the room, but I can't have you guys do all that beautiful work and not somebody come up here and acknowledge you and all of you guys and just say thank you on behalf of all of us. And with that.
Okay, yeah. Please.
So Siobhan did ask me if I would do a poem, and as I was sitting here, I thought about a poem that I did for my sister's mom. And I think it's really appropriate seeing these Black women that are always carrying this torch. No disrespect, bro, but I'm just saying, and even in the room, seeing all of us. And so I just want to do a poem called Sis Stars. It's a poem that I wrote one day, and I was telling my mom about it, and it was called Sisters originally, and she said, no, Angie, call it Sis Stars, right? So here it goes, and I want to dedicate this to you and all of these beautiful Black women in here who continue to carry this torch every single day. I want to say this is for you. I love you. You shine in darkness, lighting the way, carrying the torch day after day. Heavy the weight, but you carry the load, honoring the sisters who once paved the road. Yes, sisters, you are indeed. Twinkle, twinkle, oh brave star, do you even know how great you are? Together a constellation you create of hopes and dreams designed in your fate. Yes, sisters, you are indeed. When darkness fills the sky at night, you multiply, collective light. I see you catch our falling stars, bearing the load, 'cause that's who you are, a star, sis. You make sure if one reaches the ground, it doesn't get lost and can always be found. You are filled with the hope of the ancestors' love. So if you fall on your back, just look up, look above, and follow that star right back to your feet. 'Cause our sisters do not know defeat.
Thank you so much. Who wants to follow?
Question. I see that you have a land trust. Is it the land? Tell me, when the government, I think you said the Douglas or whatever the name is?
Frederick Douglass, yes, and
When they invited the Black slaves to come and settle in British Columbia back then, did they not give you land?
Okay.
So yes, in certain areas, land may have been offered to some folks, but that would have been only one fraction of the people that settled. And specifically, what they faced in terms of anti-Black racism was also a reason why folks did not stay where they may have been. And so that Secret Victoria video is quite long, but it does speak more to the folks in Salt Spring Island who were indeed granted land at Salt Spring Island. Whereas Hogan's Alley community, some folks, yes, did own the rights to their land there. but we're talking about land being expropriated to build the viaducts. And so even though they may have held land or land titles to certain areas, that can be superseded by city government, which is what happened. In our particular situation, I believe for other communities across Canada, the CMHC has now apologized for the specific policies that they put in place that allowed these lands to be devalued and then expropriated to build these projects. Yes, there are some of these places where Black folks were granted title, but then it was taken. And this is what the community land trust model allows us to circumvent, where these lands cannot be then expropriated for some capital project that does not serve the Black community. Instead, it's land that's held in trust by the Black community to then build upon for our own community purposes.
2 minutes.
The government allows the football, that's happening across where Black communities work, that we are considered as not just marginal, as nothing. And what we need to do right now, I can see that. I know it takes money to take it to Supreme Court, and you don't have the money to do that. But you got a government that was just elected over there. Don't give them no rest. You got the federal government that's ready to call an election. Use that issue and put the land as an issue that you need to be done and justice to be done for the people in British Columbia. I was over there, and my daughter, I have 2 daughters. One went over there and she graduated and got a nursing license and everything, and become an RN. What do you call it? And then the RN, become an RN. And my daughter, older daughter, is still there. And she said there are no Black people there. They've been there for years now, and don't know where. That all we see is people from other countries, but we can't find any people in there. She said, I would like to get married, but I find no Black.
There's definitely, that's part of what I was talking about. We can't self-invisibilize. We cannot self-invisibilize because we are there in significant number. Now this a thumbs up or yes?
There's Jamaicans, there's Guyanese, there's Trinidadians, there's Barbados, St. Vincent, there's the large African community.
Nigerian, yep.
Nigerian, Ghana, Congo.
Definitely.
Stores, Caribbean markets, Black hair salons,
Well, I'm gonna move us along because we only have a few minutes left. Some questions have come in, or more hands coming up.
So I was going to speak to a couple of the questions that are on the Slido. So this one I'm going to give for you, Siobhan. What does safe and affordable housing mean to the BIPOC community based on your engagement and experience?
Well, safe and affordable housing needs to not be, I would say, more than 30% of your income. First off, in terms of the social services system in BC, the allowable portion for your home used to be, as a single individual, $375. $375 was given to a single individual, and that was meant to pay for where they lived for a month. That got raised after a very, very, very long time to $500. Now, at this point, the rents in BC, a studio was around $2,000. Do you know how many people at this moment are sharing a room where they have a sleep schedule? We had, and continue to have, families of 5 living in 1 bedrooms. So safe and affordable housing, well, you need to be able to not be sacrificing all of your money just for the roof over your head. Because guess what? We need to eat as well. And also, you need to be in a place that is warm and dry and not infested with things with more legs than you. It's a thing. It's a thing. And so, yeah, I mean, that's what I'll say on that piece.
Okay, thank you, Siobhan. We have a question in the audience.
So it's more of an announcement.
Oh, okay.
Well, thank you very much for your work, first of all, and thanks for the presentation. So I am in the Housing Infrastructure and Communities Canada, and so we have a review panel that will be launching very soon, the written dialogue, which is an open platform where you can share ideas about what's the affordable housing mean, and the focus of the panel is to kind of examine the right to adequate housing for women of color, Black women. And so if your organization is working in this area, we would like to hear from you. So the name of the website is National Housing Council, and all the information for the platform will be published on the website.
Thank you.
Just to repeat, that was National Housing Council? Yes. Okay. I guess you can search that and then find it. So
Before we do, just another question. I do want to just make mention of the fact that for those that saw the visual invitation on page 24, it does make reference to a dinner. The intention was, because we didn't have like an official kind of Black caucus meeting, was that Black racialized individuals could go out for a meal afterwards. We do have a restaurant and a reservation made. So that is something that will follow this time together. It is not a free dinner, unfortunately. You will be responsible for your own whatever, but it is a time to continue this dialogue together. Any other questions?
Yes.
Oh, yes. If you have paid for a ticket online, it will be refunded to you. Yes.
Okay, so I guess we have time for maybe two of these questions. So this is another question for you, Siobhan, but I can always also supplement with the answer. Is there room for the organization to explore the creation of a housing facility, in quotes, shelter, tailored to serving Black people? And I believe this was actually for the two of us, for Black History Ottawa and for Hogan's Alley. So we can speak to what we already have as well. And so we have a building called Nora Hendricks Place. And this was, again, born out of the tireless efforts of the Hogan's Alley Working Group to ensure that there was a space for Black folks. We knew that we were overrepresented in the houseless population in the downtown east side, and that there was little to no movement by the city to address this. And so after strong advocacy, Nora Hendricks Place was opened, which is a Black and Indigenous housing space that sits right beside the Georgia Viaducts.
Mm-hmm. Nora Hendricks Place, I think I mentioned all this, but Nora Hendricks Place is a harm reduction focused building, which means no one under 18 can visit the building. That can be limiting for the residents. Obviously, no families. And the other building that we have is a building that's currently having students in single occupancy rooms. So we do not have a facility for housing the individuals that come to the housing support program. We are doing the advocacy and support in finding placements in whether it be co-ops, housing societies, individually owned properties, and it is rampant, the anti-Blackness that gets experienced. People get booking to see somewhere, they appear, the landlord looks at them, says the thing is gone. We, at the airport here, ordered an Uber, one bag, one carry-on, came, he had a van with 3 rows of seats and said, oh, no. Perhaps he saw into our souls. You are too much, he said. You cannot fit. So he left us there at the airport. We found another person with a very, very tiny car who insisted he could fit us in, which was the sign of his big heart and very small car, like we said. Yes.
What's the Ford girl behind our car?
All right, another question?
Okay, so this will be our our last question. Actually, we can pick one of these. Which of these two? Which
Those I cannot see.
Okay.
I'm like
All
ant
right,
number
so-
1, ant number 2.
So I'll start with this one. Are there any organizations that specialize in supporting BIPOC communities? Yes. But of course, we are also working to bring all these organizations together. So I'm thinking of BAC, I'm thinking of Hogan's Ally Society in
That's
Vancouver.
Black African Caribbean Collective, newly formed to address predominantly outside of Vancouver proper, so areas like Surrey, Langley, Coquitlam, Port Coquitlam, Port Moody, and such. And this has had a strong impact on giving voice to having collective voice on issues that come up, whether it's around issues of policing, whether it's around issues of housing, whether it's around food sovereignty and the food deserts that exist. If you're unfamiliar with that term, come and talk with me later, but it's essentially the distance that you go to be able to get to your yeah, call it out, call it out.
Yeah, it's just the distance that you would take to get to not just food, but fresh, nutritious, wholesome food. That, contributes to wellness.
Very much, thank you. Yeah, so it's like the reverse classroom. Anyone can participate and be teacher for a moment. So thank you all so very much. Oh, was there any further questions? Okay, so I will wrap us up. Please stay if you're going to stay for the dinner.